More on Tuesday night's debate and who they think came out on top. I want to bring in former Reagan economic advisor Art Laffer. Also joining the conversation from Washington, D.C. is Stephen Dinan, staff writer at the Washington Times. Art Laffer, Steve Dinan, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, Art Laffer, first I want to get your take. All of the tax plans cost money, between $2 and $12 trillion. Will you explain to us why it's okay to worsen the deficit over the next decade in order to get growth once again sustaining in this country?
I don't think they'll do that. In fact, if you really put in something like Rand Paul's or Ted Cruz's or even Ben Carson's plan, if done correctly, it shouldn't cost any money. I mean, you've got with Rand Paul, you've got something like 29% of GDP as the base, or a little bit less than GDP. There are ways of getting rid of deductions, exemptions, exclusions, and credits that would make that a revenue gainer. Jerry Brown's proposal in 1992 had a 13% flat tax on income and on business net sales, and it would have raised static revenues enormously. And with dynamics, Maria, these guys can really do a great job on reducing the deficit over time and the national debt.
Okay, so that was really my question. It's okay to deepen the deficit over the near time in order to have that goal longer term. For example, let's talk about Ted Cruz's plan for a moment, which I know you were so important in terms of putting that together. 10% income tax for individuals, 16% business tax. What is that going to cost over the near term?
Yeah, the business tax isn't the old profits tax of olden times where you tax successful companies and subsidize bad ones. This is a broad-based net sales tax, which is about the size of a little bit less than GDP. So when you put the two of those together, you've got something on the order of 20+% of GDP in the tax base. And that's about, that's about where we are now. So depending on the exemptions and deductions and exclusions, again, this doesn't have to be a net revenue loser. And with the growth it would engender, it won't be a net revenue loser. It's like everyone was yelling at Reagan historically with our tax cuts. And these guys are doing plans twice as good as Reagan's plan.
Wow. All right. That's good info, Art. Stephen, what do you think? Who presented the best economic plans for America Tuesday night, in your view?
Well, look, first of all, I got to compliment the debate because we learned a lot more about these plans and learned about them stacking up with each other, which is absolutely great for every voter, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, to be able to see that. Look, Mr. Laffer just said a lot of this does depend on what those deductions are that are still allowed and which deductions they get rid of. So we're still going to have to see that develop as we go along. Take John Kasich's plan. It amounts to what the deductions are and how much you have to cut from spending on the other side, and you get into a question of how realistic those cuts are to make it balanced. John Kasich is talking about an 8-year freeze on all non-defense discretionary spending. We've just here on Capitol Hill gone through a major fight where a freeze on non-defense discretionary spending almost led us into a government shutdown here in December because Congress couldn't agree to those sort of continuing cuts. They had to bust the budget sequester caps. So the issue here is the realistic nature of those cuts on the other side. We're going to have to see a lot more out of the candidates and what they're going to do politically to get there.
Yeah.
Stephen's
and we tried to focus on the spending cuts as well, Art. Yeah, go ahead, Art.
Yeah, Stephen's completely correct on that. I mean, what you've got to look at entitlement programs, you've got to look at all these other things. And one thing, Maria, that I'm surprised that no one has mentioned yet is sale of assets. I mean, if we did a tax amnesty program in the U.S., federal, state, and local, we could collect $250 billion right away just by taxes being paid. We could sell off properties. They estimate that these properties could be sold off for 3 or 4 years for $3 trillion. We've got the oil reserve. We've got gold in Fort Knox that no one's ever seen. Why do we hold all these assets and not sell them? That's what we should be doing, and we could reduce that national debt, I believe, in 3 or 4 years by $6 trillion just by doing those proceeds. And, that would make a huge difference in the financial situation of the United States. And every single one of these candidates out there in the Republican group is willing to go along with these types of asset sales to bring down the national debt.
So you're talking about privatizing businesses currently owned by government.
Some, post office, for example, yes. And prisons,
Yeah,
why does the government run prisons when it's 10 times more efficient with private and they don't get away as fast? You know, when you look at just Camp Pendleton, let me just take you to Camp Pendleton. Well, you're down there in Palm Springs right now. Just go to look at Camp Pendleton. It's 125,000 acres of Southern California beachfront property at $500,000 an acre. That one piece of property is worth $62.5 billion. And can you imagine? I mean, the wonderful places there. You've got so many opportunities here to do a good job, and these candidates are the ones really struggling to find it. I mean, I love the way they're all lowering taxes and broadening the base. And, you know, right now is a silly time to see whether, in fact, their exact plans lead to a little bit more deficit, a little bit less. They are painting a picture of the future. And that's what they should be doing, and all of them are doing a great job.
Yeah, gotcha. Stephen, let me get your take real quick on the minimum wage, because obviously there's this movement across the country to take the minimum wage up to $15. All of the candidates said it's a bad idea.
Yes, although you did see a little bit of difference there with John Kasich defending Ohio's slightly higher minimum wage. Look, you know, this is, as Mr. Laffer just said, you are getting a major, bold differences here between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats are actually already salivating over that answer. They believe that working Americans actually want to see that higher minimum wage, and they believe that Republicans are going to universally get punished for that. So Republicans do have some work to do, and I think they made a good step on this at the debate, but they do have some work to do in explaining that issue of what happens on the lower rung there if you raise the minimum wage. You know, one final thing on this is Congressional Budget Office says a small minimum wage hike to maybe $9 an hour could actually produce, you know, job gains overall. But if you go to the $12 that the president wants or to that $15, you're talking about major job losses.
Art, you have to believe that some small businesses are not going to be able to swallow that, and they'll actually cut jobs.
Yes. They will. I mean, when you look at it, too, it's very specifically focused on the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, and the youth in America. I mean, black teenagers literally trying to get their first job are really killed by the minimum wage. Jobs are not only shifted to capital, but they're also shifted to higher wage workers, which are really the entry-level jobs are the ones being killed. It may not cost total employment, but it sure does shift employment away from those who desperately need it to those who need it much less. And it's a tragedy that this is being pushed on the people by the Democrats. It's just wrong. And Portland, Oregon showed, Maine showed that it's not popular everywhere.
Art Laffer, Stephen Dinan, thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate it very much. We'll see you soon, gentlemen.
Great job the other night, Maria. Great job.
Thank you, Art. I really appreciate that. Coming up.